dramatically. Tonight, you're about to meet 10 individuals who looked at warning labels, safety instructions, and the basic laws of survival, and treated them like optional side quests. These are people who stared common sense directly in the eyes and confidently said, "No thanks, I got this." Some of them trusted the internet, some trusted their own genius, and a few trusted the extremely questionable advice of drunk friends. None of those strategies worked. What you're about to witness is a highlight reel of people voluntarily submitting themselves for immediate removal from the gene pool. Consider this video a public service announcement, a helpful guide to decisions you should absolutely never replicate unless you are personally trying to help evolution speed things along. Let's begin with a woman who believed the secret to eternal youth was hiding inside a snake, because apparently moisturizer was just too mainstream. Case 1. The venomous facelift. The beauty industry has convinced humanity to do some absolutely wild things. People have bathed in donkey milk, injected botulism into their faces, rubbed snail slime onto their skin. But Eleanor decided all of that was still too traditional. Eleanor was a wealthy socialite whose hobbies included expensive skincare and believing everything she read on extremely questionable wellness forums. One night, she discovered a fascinating concept called mithridatism. This ancient practice involves exposing the body to small amounts of poison over time in order to build immunity. Historically, kings used it to survive assassination attempts. Eleanor planned to use it for anti-aging. According to the internet article she trusted more than basic biology, snake venom could stimulate circulation, trigger cellular repair, and naturally plump wrinkles. Which is technically true, just not in the way she imagined. So Eleanor acquired a snake. Not a cute, harmless garden snake. She chose a Russell's viper, one of the most aggressive venomous snakes on Earth. Its venom is hemotoxic, meaning it destroys blood cells and turns internal organs into something resembling raspberry jam. Eleanor named it Cuddles, which was already a warning sign. Her beauty routine quickly became unconventional. Every few weeks, she would annoy the snake just enough to provoke a small defensive bite. A microdose, as she called it. Her arms would swell. Her skin would redden. Sometimes entire patches of tissue would begin dying. Eleanor called this detoxing. Her friends called it terrifying. But Eleanor insisted she had discovered the ultimate organic facelift. Then came the night of her annual charity gala. Feeling she needed an extra glow before the event, Eleanor decided to increase her dosage. Instead of lightly provoking Cuddles, she aggressively harassed the snake. Cuddles, who had tolerated this arrangement far longer than most reptiles would, finally decided the spa contract was over. The snake struck. Hard. Not a polite cosmetic nibble. A full venom injection straight into Eleanor's bloodstream. Within minutes, the plumping effect became dramatic. Her arms swelled like a balloon. Her blood began clotting internally. Her organs started shutting down like a computer being unplugged. By the time paramedics arrived, they weren't dealing with a beauty treatment. They were dealing with a biological disaster. Eleanor had spent years trying to stop aging. And technically, she succeeded. She stopped aging completely that night at 42, which is a very extreme skincare routine, but it does guarantee permanent results. Case 2. The amateur bomb disposal expert. In many parts of Europe, World War II still occasionally resurfaces. Not metaphorically, literally. Unexploded bombs from the 1940s are still buried in fields, forests, and construction sites, quietly waiting for someone with extremely poor judgment to come along. Normally, when one of these relics is discovered, professionals are called in. People in bomb suits. People who enjoy having all of their limbs remain attached. But Martin was not one of those people. Martin was what you might call aggressively self-reliant. The kind of man who believed that if something had bolts on it, he could probably take it apart with a wrench and a confident attitude. While renovating an old rural property in Eastern Europe, Martin discovered a large, rusty metal object buried in the soil. It looked like a cylinder. Heavy. Military. Most people would immediately stop digging. Martin, however, was excited. He had found war memorabilia. After dragging the object into his garage and wiping the dirt off, the shape became obvious. It was an unexploded World War II artillery shell. Now at this point, there are exactly two correct responses. 1. Back away slowly. 2. Call the authorities. Martin chose option 3. I wonder what's inside. His plan was simple. He would remove the fuse from the shell, empty the explosives, and keep the metal casing as a cool decoration for his workshop. In theory, this sounds possible. In reality, unexploded ordnance contains extremely sensitive explosives designed to detonate when exposed to pressure, heat, vibration, or occasionally, curiosity. But Martin had tools and confidence, which is apparently the same thing as expertise if you ignore all the ways it isn't. He clamped the shell in a workbench vise, picked up a large wrench, and began twisting the fuse. At first, nothing happened, which unfortunately encouraged him. Because explosives are very patient, they will happily wait until the exact moment you feel comfortable. When the fuse finally shifted slightly, the friction triggered the internal detonator. What happened next was less of an explosion and more of a rapid architectural renovation. The garage ceased to exist as a structure. Windows shattered across the property. Neighbors later reported hearing what sounded like a cannon firing directly inside the house, which, in a way, is exactly what happened. Martin had successfully opened the shell, just not in the way he intended. Bomb disposal experts later confirmed that the artillery shell had remained perfectly stable for nearly 80 years, until someone with a wrench decided it needed a closer inspection. Which just goes to show something very important about unexploded bombs. They are extremely safe, right up until the moment someone tries to fix them themselves. Case 3. The Honest Escape Artist. In the world of magic, deception is not just expected, it's required. Every magician knows the secret rule of the industry. Never make the danger real. The audience believes the risk is real, but behind the scenes, everything is carefully designed to be safe. Fake chains, trick locks, hidden releases. That's the entire point of stage magic. Pierre, however, believed that rule made him look weak. Pierre was a street escapologist, performing along the banks of the River Seine in Paris. For years, his act was simple. Handcuffs, ropes, dramatic struggling, and a quick escape that earned applause and a handful of coins. But Pierre had a problem. Crowds were getting bored, and in street performance, boredom is financial death. So Pierre decided to escalate. His new finale was called The Watery Grave. The stunt was straightforward. He would be chained, padlocked inside a wooden crate, and thrown into the river. After a few tense minutes, he would escape underwater and dramatically surface to the crowd's amazement, a classic trick. But Pierre made one crucial mistake. He decided the stunt needed authenticity. Instead of trick locks used by magicians, Pierre went to a professional hardware store and bought real industrial-grade steel padlocks, the kind used to secure warehouses and prison gates. His thinking was that real locks would make the illusion stronger, because technically, they wouldn't be an illusion anymore, they would just be locks. On the day of the performance, a large crowd gathered along the riverbank. Pierre smiled confidently as volunteers chained his arms and legs. The heavy steel locks clicked shut one by one. He raised his hands for applause. The crate lid was nailed shut. Then it was pushed into the water. Splash! The box sank beneath the surface. The crowd began counting. 1 minute passed. 2 minutes passed. The tension was fantastic. People leaned forward, waiting for the triumphant escape. 3 minutes passed. Then 4. The cheering stopped. Inside the crate, Pierre had made a horrifying discovery. The locks were exactly as advertised. High quality, extremely secure, and completely impossible to pick while underwater with limited oxygen and shaking hands. He tried again and again to force the mechanism, but real security hardware is designed for a very specific purpose, keeping people inside. By the time divers recovered the crate, the performance was over. Police later needed industrial bolt cutters to open the locks, confirming something very important. Pierre had been right. The locks were indeed escape-proof. Unfortunately, the only thing he managed to escape was the gene pool. Case 4. The bicycle versus the Olympic bobsled track. There are two types of people in the world. People who see an Olympic bobsled track and think, wow, that's an incredibly dangerous professional sports facility. And then there's Hans. Hans saw the exact same thing and thought, bet I could ride my bike down that. Now, if you've never seen a bobsled track up close, let me paint a quick picture. It's basically a concrete ice tunnel designed to launch humans down a frozen chute at highway speeds. Professional athletes ride specially engineered sleds with steel runners. They wear aerodynamic suits, helmets, years of training, and even then, crashes are still terrifying. Hans, however, had something even more powerful than Olympic training. He had confidence, the dangerous kind. One winter night in Germany, Hans decided the closed Olympic training facility looked like the perfect place for an adrenaline experiment. He climbed the fence, ignored several extremely large warning signs written in terrifyingly formal German, and wheeled his mountain bike up to the top of the starting ramp. Now, at this moment, physics quietly cleared its throat, because bicycles rely on something extremely important: friction. Rubber tires grip roads. That's how bikes steer. That's how they slow down. That's how they avoid becoming airborne human missiles. A bobsled track, however, is made of polished ice, which has approximately the same friction as butter on a hot frying pan. Hans pushed off anyway. At first, it probably felt amazing. Cold air rushing past his face, the thrill of speed, the sense that he was about to invent a brand new Olympic sport called extreme poor decisions. Then gravity started doing what gravity does best. The slope steepened, the speed increased, and suddenly Hans realized something deeply concerning. His tires were no longer gripping the ice. They were just decorating it. Steering became impossible. Braking became theoretical. And the bike turned into a two-wheeled missile powered entirely by regret. The first curve arrived fast. Professional bobsleds ride high on the walls using centrifugal force. Hans attempted the same maneuver. Except bicycles do not behave like sleds. The tires slipped instantly. The bike shot sideways, and Hans entered what engineers technically call the ragdoll phase. He bounced down the chute like a pinball inside a frozen washing machine. Faster, harder, completely out of control. The track eventually straightens near the bottom, but by that point, Hans wasn't riding anymore. He was just a human projectile traveling at terrifying speed. He slammed into the solid concrete barrier at the end of the run, instantly, violently. Final score? Gravity, 1. Hans, 0. Police later reported that his helmet was still perfectly intact, which is impressive because the rest of the situation was not. Hans had attempted to turn a professional Olympic facility into a personal thrill ride, and in doing so, he proved one very important scientific principle. If a sport requires a specialized sled, protective gear, and years of training, maybe don't bring a Schwinn bicycle to the party. Case 5. The 20 Bug Bomb Apocalypse. There are two kinds of homeowners when they discover cockroaches. The first type calmly buys some traps, calls pest control, and handles the problem like a normal adult. The second type is Arthur. Arthur believed in something called maximum overkill. To Arthur, cockroaches were not just pests, they were enemies, invaders, tiny six-legged terrorists who had declared war on his kitchen cabinets. And Arthur intended to respond with the enthusiasm of a man launching a small chemical attack. So he went to the hardware store and bought bug bombs, those aerosol foggers designed to fill a room with pesticide gas. Now, normally you use one per room. That's what the instructions say. But Arthur had read the instructions and decided they were written by cowards. Because if one bug bomb works, then 20 bug bombs must work 20 times better. Arthur placed foggers in the kitchen, the living room, the bathroom, the hallway, the laundry room. By the time he finished, his modest suburban home looked less like pest control and more like a World War I gas experiment. Then he pressed all the triggers. 20 cans began hissing simultaneously. Within seconds, the house filled with a thick chemical fog of pesticide and propane propellant. Arthur stepped outside proudly. The bugs, he thought, were about to experience the worst day in cockroach history. And technically, they were. But then Arthur made a small discovery. His car keys were still inside the house. Now, a rational person would wait. Call a locksmith. Go get coffee. Watch the roaches suffer from a safe distance. Arthur, however, believed in efficiency, so he decided to run inside quickly and grab the keys. He held his breath, opened the door, and stepped into a fog so thick it looked like a haunted nightclub. What Arthur didn't know was that the air inside his house was no longer air. It was now a perfectly mixed cloud of extremely flammable gas. Essentially, his entire house had become a giant fuel air bomb. Arthur stumbled through the fog toward the kitchen, eyes watering, lungs burning, hands searching blindly for the counter. And then instinct kicked in. Because humans hate darkness, his hand found the wall, touched the light switch, and flipped it. Click. Inside every light switch is a tiny spark, normally harmless, but inside a house full of propane vapor, that spark becomes a very enthusiastic ignition source. The explosion was instant. The blast lifted the roof, blew out every window, and turned Arthur's suburban bungalow into what investigators later described as a debris field. Neighbors reported hearing a boom strong enough to shake the street. Firefighters later confirmed two things. First, the cockroaches were definitely dead. Second, Arthur had technically solved the infestation problem. He had simply removed the entire house from existence in the process, which just goes to show, when dealing with pests, it's usually better to call exterminators than to accidentally invent home demolition by bug spray. Case 6. The Cat Rescue Physics Experiment. Every year, thousands of cats climb trees, and almost every single time, one thing eventually happens. The cat comes down. Because cats are very good at climbing down trees. But Kevin didn't know that. Or more accurately, Kevin didn't trust the cat to figure it out. Kevin's cat, Mr. Whiskers, had climbed onto a high branch of a large oak tree in the front yard and refused to come down. Now, at this point, most people would do one of three things: wait, shake a bag of treats, or call someone who owns a ladder. Kevin chose option 4, mechanical engineering. He looked at the tree, looked at his car, looked at a long rope in the garage, and a plan formed in his brain that can only be described as aggressively incorrect. Kevin tied one end of the rope to a large branch where Mr. Whiskers was sitting. Then he tied the other end to the rear bumper of his sedan. His theory was simple: drive forward slowly, bend the branch down, grab the cat, untie the rope, problem solved. In Kevin's head, this was brilliant. In reality, Kevin had just built something known in physics as a giant wooden catapult. He got into the driver's seat, put the car in drive, and slowly pressed the gas. The rope went tight. The branch began to bend. Mr. Whiskers watched the entire operation with the expression cats reserve for watching humans make terrible decisions. Kevin looked in the rearview mirror. The branch wasn't bending enough, so he pressed the gas a little harder. The oak branch bent further, now storing an incredible amount of potential energy. Wood groaned, rope stretched. Physics was loading the spring. Kevin gave it just a little more acceleration. And that's when the branch snapped. Not the rope, the branch, with the sound of a gunshot. And suddenly, all that stored energy had somewhere to go. The broken branch didn't fall to the ground. It whipped backward toward the car at terrifying speed, like a wooden spear fired from a medieval siege weapon. It smashed through the rear windshield, tore through the driver's seat, and impaled Kevin before he even had time to process what was happening. The car rolled slowly to a stop in the yard, engine still running. Physics lesson complete. And the punchline? Mr. Whiskers, startled by the noise, simply let go of the branch, fell through the leaves, landed perfectly on his feet, and calmly walked back into the house for dinner. Which proves something scientists have known for centuries. Cats don't need rescuing, but humans absolutely need supervision. Case 7. The Piano Moving Master Plan. Moving day is one of the most stressful experiences in human life. It ranks somewhere between root canals and assembling IKEA furniture without the instructions. Most people solve this problem by hiring movers, professionals, people with straps, dollies, and a healthy fear of gravity. Bob, however, believed professional movers were a scam invented by people who didn't trust their own upper body strength. Bob was a proud do-it-yourself guy, and the crown jewel of his living room was a vintage upright piano. Now, if you've never moved an upright piano before, here's a helpful reference. They weigh roughly 500 to 800 pounds, which is approximately the same as a fully grown motorcycle, made of cast iron and regret. Bob lived on the second floor of an apartment building. The staircase was narrow. Turning corners was impossible. Most people at this point would realize the situation required equipment, or professionals. Bob chose a third option, engineering. His plan was simple. He would lift the piano to the balcony using a rope and pulley system. Now, when professional riggers lift heavy objects, they use steel cables rated for thousands of pounds, industrial pulleys, safety harnesses, hard hats. Bob used a rope he found in the garage that looked like it had previously fought in the Civil War. He tied the rope around the piano, ran it through a small pulley attached to the balcony railing, then recruited a few terrified friends upstairs to pull. Slowly, the piano began rising, swaying in the air like a giant wooden pendulum of bad decisions. Bob stood below, supervising the operation like a construction foreman who had skipped every class involving physics. The piano started drifting sideways. Bob didn't like that, so he stepped directly underneath it, arms raised, ready to guide the 600-pound object with his hands. Which is exactly what cartoon characters do before something terrible happens. The rope held, for a moment. Then gravity remembered it was in charge. The rope snapped with a sound like a gunshot. The piano dropped. Fast, heavy, final. Bob didn't move in time. He didn't even really have time to understand what was happening. 1 second he was giving instructions. The next second he was demonstrating a very important scientific principle. Objects that weigh half a ton should not be caught with your face. The police report later noted that the piano itself was surprisingly undamaged, which is impressive, because Bob, unfortunately, was not. It was a tragic but educational moment. Bob tried to save money on moving costs, and ended up paying the full price of gravity, which, historically speaking, never offers refunds. Case 8. The Wine Tank Heist. Tuscany is famous for 3 things: beautiful rolling hills, world-class wine, and apparently the occasional fatal lesson in basic chemistry. This brings us to Lorenzo. Lorenzo loved wine. Unfortunately, Lorenzo loved expensive wine, and Lorenzo's bank account loved cheap wine. So Lorenzo came up with a solution that has historically worked very well for criminals and very poorly for criminals who are bad at science. He decided to steal it. One night, Lorenzo broke into a high-end vineyard cellar. His plan was simple: grab a few valuable bottles, sell them later, and maybe keep one for himself. Easy. Except, when he entered the cellar, Lorenzo noticed something far more interesting. Huge stainless steel fermentation tanks, each one filled with thousands of gallons of fresh wine still in production. And Lorenzo thought, why steal bottles when you can drink straight from the source? He climbed a metal ladder up the side of one massive fermentation tank, opened the hatch, and leaned over the edge. Now, this is where Lorenzo accidentally volunteered for a chemistry demonstration. During fermentation, yeast converts sugar into alcohol, which is fantastic news for wine lovers, but it also produces massive amounts of carbon dioxide gas. And CO2 has a sneaky little property. It's heavier than air, meaning it doesn't float away. Instead, it collects inside containers like an invisible lake of suffocation. The tank Lorenzo opened wasn't just full of wine. The air above it was full of pure carbon dioxide, which is completely odorless, completely invisible, and completely incapable of supporting life. Lorenzo leaned further inside to smell the wine, took a deep breath, and inhaled nothing but CO2. The effect was immediate. No coughing, no warning. His brain simply shut down due to lack of oxygen. One moment he was committing petty theft, the next moment he was unconscious. He tipped forward and fell into the tank. Splash. By the time workers arrived the next morning, Lorenzo was floating peacefully in a vat of expensive wine, which created a very awkward situation for the vineyard owner. Because technically Lorenzo had succeeded. He had become part of the vintage. The entire batch had to be destroyed. Which meant Lorenzo not only died stealing wine, he also managed to ruin several $1,000s worth of it. Which is impressive, because most wine critics struggle to leave that kind of impact on a bottle. And the lesson here is simple: if you want a drink, go to a bar. Because the farm-to-table experience becomes a lot less romantic when you accidentally become an ingredient. Size equals 0, width equals 100%, a line equals center, greater than, case 9, the lava lamp speed run. Lava lamps are designed to do one thing: relax you. You plug them in, wait patiently, and eventually the colorful blobs start floating around like slow-motion jellyfish at a psychedelic aquarium. It's calm, it's peaceful, it's also very slow. Usually it takes about 45 minutes for a lava lamp to warm up properly. Most people accept this. Steve did not. Steve lived in a small apartment, decorated like it was permanently stuck in 1969. Vintage posters, vinyl records, and in the center of his living room sat a large, retro lava lamp. One night, Steve decided he wanted the lava lamp experience immediately. Not in 45 minutes, not in 30 minutes, right now. Which is how he came up with what he believed was a brilliant life hack. The lava lamp worked by heating the wax inside. So if heat made it work, more heat must make it work faster. This is technically correct, just not in the way Steve imagined. Steve unplugged the lava lamp, carried the glass vessel into his kitchen, and placed it directly on top of an electric stove burner. Then he turned the dial to high. Now, most lava lamps come with several warnings. Things like, do not shake, do not overheat, and most importantly, do not place on stove. Steve, like most people reading instruction manuals, treated these warnings like the terms and conditions of a software update. He ignored all of them. At first, nothing happened. The lamp just sat there, heating, slowly, quietly. Inside the glass, the liquid began to boil. The wax melted. Pressure started building. Because lava lamps are sealed containers, meaning when the liquid expands, the pressure has nowhere to go. Steve stood in front of the stove watching, waiting for the lava blobs to start dancing. Instead, he was accidentally building something engineers call a pressure vessel failure. Then it happened, without warning. Boom! The lava lamp exploded like a small glass grenade. Hot liquid, molten wax, and thick shards of glass blasted across the kitchen. Steve, standing directly in front of the stove, admiring his genius shortcut, took the full impact of the explosion. A large shard of the glass casing shot straight into his chest, instantly ending what might be history's most unnecessary speedrun. Emergency responders later found the kitchen covered in purple wax and shattered glass, which honestly sounds like the aftermath of a very strange art project. In the end, Steve did succeed in making the lava lamp heat up faster. Much faster. Unfortunately, he also discovered an important scientific principle. When you turn decorative lighting into improvised kitchen explosives, the party is usually over. Very quickly. Case 10. The Stone Pineapple Heist. There are two types of people who visit historic estates. The first type walks around, admires the architecture, maybe takes a few photos and goes home. The second type is Sheila. Sheila saw historic architecture and thought, that would look great in my garden. One evening in England, Sheila was walking past an old countryside estate when she spotted the perfect decorative item. At the top of a brick gate pillar sat a large stone pineapple. Now, if you're unfamiliar with British architecture, stone pineapples are a thing. Back in the 1700s, they symbolized wealth and hospitality. They were carved from solid limestone and placed on gateposts as a sign that the owner had both taste and money. They were also designed to weigh roughly the same as a small refrigerator. Sheila, however, saw something else. She saw free landscaping decor. So, she decided to steal it. She climbed onto the brick gatepost, grabbed the iron railing for balance, and began shaking the massive stone ornament to loosen it. Now here's the problem with Sheila's plan. She was standing directly under the object she was trying to dislodge, which is not usually where you want to be when gravity gets involved. But Sheila was committed. She tugged, pulled, shoved the heavy stone sculpture back and forth. Over time, the old mortar holding the pineapple in place had weakened from decades of rain and frost. Eventually, it cracked. And that's when physics clocked in for work. With one final push, the mortar gave way. The pineapple detached from the pillar and obeyed the most reliable law in the universe: gravity. The stone pineapple didn't gently drop into Sheila's arms like she imagined. It fell straight down, directly onto her face. The impact was instant, final, and extremely educational for anyone watching. When police arrived the next morning, they found Sheila pinned beneath the stone sculpture she had attempted to steal. The pineapple itself was perfectly intact, which is impressive, because Sheila unfortunately was not. In the end, she died trying to redecorate her garden, which proves an important rule of interior design. If your new furniture weighs several hundred pounds and lives on top of a brick pillar, maybe leave it there. Because in the battle between thieves and gravity, gravity has a perfect, undefeated record. And that wraps up today's tour through the Museum of Legendary Bad Decisions. 10 people who looked at common sense and politely declined. Now I want to hear from you. What is the dumbest thing you have ever seen someone attempt in real life? Drop it in the comments. Because humanity clearly has an unlimited supply of new contestants for the Darwin Awards. If you enjoyed this episode of Mr. Play Dumb, hit the like button so YouTube knows you appreciate watching other people make terrible decisions. Subscribe for more stories proving that evolution may be slow, but stupidity moves very, very fast. And remember, stay curious, stay entertained, but most importantly, stay alive.